The morning my husband made me breakfast, I knew something was wrong. In 6 years of marriage, Nathan had never once woken up before me to cook. Yet there he stood smiling, humming, flipping an omelet in an apron I bought him as a joke. His cologne was too strong. His eyes kept drifting to his phone, face down on the counter, buzzing. By that evening, he would be dead, and I would still be standing exactly where he had left me. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old, and I am a forensic accountant, which is just a refined way of saying I find the money people try to hide, and I follow it until it tells me the truth. I am patient. I notice things. I do not forget numbers. That Saturday morning, my husband Nathan stood at the stove and announced he had a surprise. A weekend trip, just the two of us, up the Pacific Coast Highway to a stretch of cliffs past the headlands where he had booked a cabin. He had already packed the cooler. He wanted to hike the cliff trails, watch the sunset, and his exact word, reconnect. I almost said no. My sister Dana was passing through town. I had a quarterly filing sitting unfinished. But Nathan kept pushing, gentle and relentless, and some quiet part of me wanted desperately to be wrong about him. So I said yes. I went upstairs and packed a bag. Out of habit, the kind of deep professional habit that lives in your hands, I slipped my laptop into the side pocket. I had no reason for it, no work to finish, just habit. That habit saved my life. I will come back to that. The drive took 3 hours. Nathan was different on the road, quiet, watchful, drumming his fingers on the wheel. Around the second hour, his phone lit up with a text. He flinched, then laughed too loudly and said it was work. I looked out at the ocean, moving in and out of the tree line, and I thought calmly, the way I think when a ledger stops making sense, you are lying, Nathan. I just don't know why yet. We stopped at a scenic overlook near the top of the cliffs, one of those turnouts with a weathered wooden railing and a small bronze plaque about migrating gray whales. There were other people there, a couple with a golden retriever, an older woman in a red windbreaker, a young family eating sandwiches off the tailgate of a pickup truck. Normal Saturday afternoon. Blue sky tearing open through the clouds. Nathan parked and said he wanted photographs. We walked to the railing together. The wind at the edge was enormous, the kind that pulls the words out of your mouth before you can finish them. Nathan took my picture. I still have it. I am squinting into the sun, half laughing, the ocean spread behind me like hammered silver. I looked happy in it. I thought later, much later, about why he took it. It was so the people at the overlook would remember us, together, normal, happy. I left my good lens in the car, he said. He kissed my cheek. Actually kissed my cheek. And then he walked back toward the SUV, and I turned to look at the water, and when I turned around again, the car was pulling out of the turnout. Slowly at first, then faster. It rounded the bend. It did not slow down. It did not come back. I want you to understand what that moment is like, the exact second your brain simply refuses the information. I stood there telling myself he was turning around, but there was no room to turn around. It was a single, narrow road hugging the cliffside. So I thought, he's gone down to find a wider section. He'll come back. I waited. The wind howled. The older woman in the red windbreaker came and stood beside me and made quiet conversation about whale migrations. I answered her, and I smiled, the way a person smiles when everything underneath them has just turned to glass and they haven't stepped yet. 5 minutes. 10. I called Nathan. It rang and dropped to voicemail. I called again. The phone was off. That was when the cold feeling under my ribs turned into something solid. I did not cry. I keep telling people I did because it is what they expect. But I didn't. I went very still and very clear, the way I go still when the numbers stop adding up and I know someone has been stealing. I thought he planned this. He drove me 3 hours to the loneliest stretch of coast he could find, and he left me here. The older woman saw my face change. "Honey, are you all right?" "My husband just drove off," I said. The words sounded insane out loud. "That can't be right," she said. The man with the dog came over. The family from the truck came over. In about 90 seconds, I became the strange spectacle at the overlook, the abandoned wife at the edge of the continent with a small backpack and no car. Someone offered me water. Someone mentioned that the road ahead was closed for a rock slide repair. They'd passed the sign on the way up. So wherever Nathan had gone, he'd hit a dead end and would have to turn back. I felt a flicker of hope, stupid and embarrassing, and then the young woman from the truck pointed down the coastline and said, "Hey, isn't that the black truck that nearly ran us off the road on the way up, going way too fast?" We all looked. Far below, where the road curved around the next headland, a black SUV was moving at speed, leaning hard into the bends, Nathan's truck. And then the woman said, squinting, "There's someone in the passenger seat, a woman, yellow jacket." I knew that jacket. That morning, before we left, I had glanced at my phone and seen a post on social media. Nathan's business partner had uploaded a sunrise photo, a marina, a coffee cup captioned with something about new beginnings. A bright yellow rain jacket was draped over her arm in the frame. Her name was Sophia, his partner at the firm. The woman he swore was only a colleague. The one whose name made his jaw tighten every time I said it. He had not left alone. He had left me here so he could drive off with her. I think I would have stood there for an hour, frozen in a kind of cold fury, if my phone had not rung. The screen read, "County Sheriff's Department." My first thought, God help me, was that he had called to report me missing. Some instinct for self-protection, some cover story, I answered. A man's voice, careful and flat in the way that tells you something is coming before the words arrive. He asked if I was the wife of the owner of a black Ford Explorer and gave me the plate number. I confirmed it. I told him my husband had driven off in it 20 minutes ago, that I could in fact see it right now on the road below. The officer said very gently that there had been an accident. The vehicle had gone through the safety barrier on the closed section of the road, off the cliff. 2 occupants. Neither had survived. I remember saying, "That's not possible. I'm looking at it." I remember him asking me to confirm the registration. I remember pulling up the photo of the registration card on my phone with hands that had gone completely numb. I remember reading him the number from the screen and him saying, very quietly, that it matched. The older woman in the red windbreaker took hold of my elbow because I had started to sway. I remember the wind. I remember the sound of the ocean below. I remember thinking with a clarity that frightened me, 2 occupants, and knowing immediately, with the cold precision of someone who reads hidden truths for a living, exactly who the second one was. Nathan was dead. So was Sophia. And I was standing at the railing where he had left me alive, only because he had needed me out of the car. The rest of that day is a smear at the edges. The couple with the dog drove me down to the nearest town and sat with me in a small walk-in clinic until a sheriff's deputy arrived. I gave my statement. I said my husband had gone back to the car to retrieve something and never returned. I did not say he had driven off with another woman. I did not say I believed he had intended to leave me there for good. I had learned long ago, in my work, that you do not hand people your conclusions. You give them the facts, and you let them watch you stay calm. My sister Dana drove 3 hours up the coast that night and held me in a motel room while I shook. That was when the shaking finally came, the shaking I had refused to do at the cliff. She sat on the edge of the bed with her arms around me and did not once tell me to calm down or say it would be fine. She just stayed. Sometime around 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, I began doing what I always do when something stops making sense. I started adding it up. Nathan had planned the trip overnight rushed, with no lead time. He had made breakfast, a performance, though I still couldn't tell for whom. He had chosen the one stretch of coastal road in the county that dead-ended at a closed section. He had left me at the overlook where there were witnesses, people who would remember seeing us together, happy, married, normal. And then he had driven off at speed with Sophia in the passenger seat, heading directly toward a barricaded section of road. Why? If you are running away with your lover, you do not aim for a dead end. You do not drive fast toward a barricade unless you did not know the road was closed. Unless you thought you had a clear run. Unless something on that truck failed precisely where the road ran out. I did not sleep that night. By morning, I had made 2 decisions. The first, I was not going to be the quiet, grieving widow who let other people handle the paperwork. The second, I was going to find out exactly what had happened on that road, and I was going to do it before anyone realized I was looking. The funeral was 4 days later, and that is where I met the rest of it. Nathan's mother, Margaret, arrived dressed in black, with the bearing of a woman who had rehearsed her grief in the mirror. She and I had never been close. She had told Nathan at our wedding rehearsal loud enough for me to hear that I was fine for now. 6 years she had treated me like a house guest who had overstayed. Now she sat in the front pew and wept, and every few minutes her eyes would find me across the church, and there was nothing wet in them at all, just a hard, measuring stare, the kind you give a problem you intend to solve. Nathan's younger brother, Wyatt, did not bother with weeping. He cornered me at the guest book before the service had even started, a folder tucked under his arm. No condolences, straight to business. "We need to talk about the estate," he said. He opened the folder just enough for me to see the top sheet, a life insurance policy, $5 million. Beneficiary Margaret. And beneath it, a document that looked like a will dated 8 months earlier, leaving the condo, the cars, and Nathan's share of the firm to his mother and brother. Leaving me, his wife of 6 years, almost nothing. "You should know where things stand," Wyatt said, watching my face carefully. "Mom is the beneficiary. The condo comes back to the family. We'll give you time to find somewhere to go, of course. We're not monsters." Here is what he was counting on, and what I want to say clearly: that document meant far less than he believed. I am a surviving spouse. In this state, a spouse cannot be erased from the marital estate with a typed page and a confident voice. A real will goes through probate. A surviving spouse can stand before a judge and claim her legal share of everything built during the marriage, regardless of what a piece of paper says. The condo we bought together was half mine the day we signed for it. No mother-in-law was going to padlock me out of my own home. I knew all of that standing right there at the guest book. What I did not do was say it. I let my chin tremble. I let my voice go small. "I can't think about any of this right now," I whispered. I watched the satisfaction settle over his face like a curtain falling into place, and I thought, good, keep believing I'm soft. Keep believing. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. Because the forged will did not frighten me. It told me something. People do not rush an estate 4 days into a death out of grief. They do it when they are afraid of what an investigation might find. The folder in Wyatt's hands was not sorrow, it was a getaway plan. That night, I called my college friend, Renee, an estate attorney with 15 years of experience. I called her at 9 on a Sunday, and she answered. The first thing she said after expressing her condolences was, "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Do not move out. Do not let anyone change the locks, and if they try, document it in writing." The second thing she said was to request the accident investigation file. If there was even a whisper that it hadn't been a clean accident, she wanted the police looking hard, not wrapping it up fast. Renee filed a notice with the probate court the following morning that froze the entire estate. The look on Margaret's face when that letter arrived is one of the few warm memories I carry from that whole terrible stretch of weeks, but Renee could only protect what I already had. She could not tell me what had happened on that cliff road. For that, I needed someone else entirely, and I found her the way I find anyone in my line of work. I asked around quietly for someone who had once been a law enforcement officer, and now did the things officers could not. Her name was Quinn. She was around 50, soft-spoken, with a handshake like a vice grip. When I laid everything I knew across a diner table, the breakfast, the cologne, the dead-end road, the speed, the yellow jacket, the insurance policy, the rushed will, she did not tell me I was paranoid. She did not suggest I was a grieving widow seeing patterns in grief. She tapped the table once and asked, "Where did the truck get serviced?" That stopped me. 2 people in a black SUV go off a cliff on a road the man was driving fast and confident like he fully expected it to handle, Quinn said. "You told me he was a careful driver. Careful drivers do not lose a vehicle on a curve they can see coming," she shrugged. "Could be nothing. But the first thing I want to know is when those brakes were last touched and by whom." I knew exactly where Nathan had the truck serviced because I had paid that bill. A garage 2 towns over, not the dealership, not the shop near our condo. He had switched mechanics about 3 weeks before the trip. I had been mildly irritated about it at the time because the new place was out of the way. I had assumed he was chasing a lower price. Sitting in that diner, I felt the whole picture tilt. Quinn pulled the preliminary accident report through a contact of hers, while Renee requested the official file through proper channels. It took a week. When it arrived, 2 lines in the mechanical section stopped me cold. The brake system had shown a loss of fluid consistent with a slow leak, and the service records indicated that work had been performed on the vehicle approximately 11 days prior at the garage 2 towns over. A slow leak, not a sudden failure, not a blowout. The kind of thing that lets a man drive for a week without noticing. That lets him drive 3 hours up the coast feeling perfectly fine and then gives out the first time he stands hard on the pedal. Say, for instance, when a barricade appears on a cliff road and he needs to stop, and he cannot. I am a forensic accountant. I do not believe in coincidences. I believe in patterns, and the pattern I was looking at was this: a husband who had quietly switched mechanics weeks before a private trip, a brake line that had begun slowly leaking days before that drive, a mother holding a $5 million insurance policy, a brother holding a will that erased the wife, and a family that was very, very eager to call it all an accident and bury it as fast as possible. The question keeping me awake was no longer who, it was which of them and how deep it went. I went to see the mechanic myself. Quinn told me not to. She said to let her handle it. Said I was too close. Said a grieving widow walking into a garage and confronting a man about a murder was how you got a door slammed in your face and a story buried for good. She was right. I went anyway. I had to look at his face. The garage was exactly what you would picture: a low cinder block building on a county road, oil-dark floors, a radio playing classic rock at a volume that made conversation feel like an intrusion. The owner was a heavy-set man named Earl, sitting on a sagging couch with a cigarette and a phone, watching the door with the practiced disinterest of a man who has spent his whole life not being curious about other people's business. I showed him a photograph of Nathan's truck. I asked if he had worked on it. His face did a thing. Just a flicker there and gone. The flicker of a man who recognizes a vehicle he has been hoping no one would ever ask him about again. He said he worked on a lot of trucks and did not look up from the photograph. This one went off a cliff 11 days after you serviced it, I said. 2 people are dead. The brakes had a slow leak. The state is reviewing the mechanical file. That last part was true. I made it sound closer than it was. Earl put the cigarette down. He told me his security cameras had been broken for months. He told me he just fixed what came in. He told me to watch my mouth. But his hands had begun to move restless, betraying, and a man's hands tell you everything his mouth will not. So I leaned in and said the thing Quinn would have wanted to strangle me for saying. I told him there was a witness who had seen him take a cash payment from an older woman in a parking lot the week before the crash. It was a bluff. A calculated guess built on the pattern I had been tracing for 2 weeks. I watched the color drain from his face. He grabbed my arm, pulled me into the corner behind the parts shelf, and dropped his voice to a terrified whisper. "Who are you?" "I'm the wife of the man you killed," I said. "And I already know it wasn't your idea. So you have one chance to be a witness instead of a murderer. Who paid you?" He did not give me a name. He was too frightened and, in that specific way, too smart. But he said something better. He said, "I didn't kill anybody. I did a brake job. Somebody told me to skip a step. Said it was an insurance thing. Said the truck just needed a slow tow eventually. That's all. Nobody said anybody was going to." He stopped. His eyes were wet. "I want a lawyer. I'm done talking." I left. I called Quinn from the car, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Instead of shouting at me, she went very quiet, which was worse. Then she said, "Okay, he's the seam. Now we pull it." She arranged a meeting with a detective. She trusted a man named Reeves, who had worked homicides for 20 years and had a reputation for not closing files before they were ready. We sat across from him at a conference table and laid down everything we had: the accident report, the brake fluid, the switched mechanic, Earl's visible reaction, the timeline of the insurance policy, and the rushed will. We laid it all out like a ledger. To his credit, Detective Reeves did not shrug it off. He did not tell us we were reading too much into grief. He pulled Earl in the following morning, and Earl, facing the weight of a homicide charge with his own name on the work order, gave them everything in a single afternoon. He had been paid in cash. By a younger man, nervous, anxious. Earl picked him out of a photo array on the first attempt. It was Wyatt, Nathan's brother. The man who had cornered me at the guest book 4 days after the crash, with a folder under his arm and a smile that never reached his eyes. But here is the part no detective could fully explain on their own, the part that required someone who understood money. I went back to Nathan's personal laptop. I had taken it from his home office the week after the accident, before the family had thought to change the locks on the condo. The password was our wedding anniversary. The man had used the same password for everything. I sat down and I followed the money the way I follow money. There were 2 life insurance policies, not one. The $5 million policy with Margaret listed as beneficiary, which Wyatt had waved in my face at the funeral, and a second policy, smaller, newer, taken out by Nathan on Sophia's life, with a beneficiary line that had been quietly changed twice in the past 8 months. It took me one full night to unsnarl the complete picture. But when I did, the shape of it made me physically sick. Nathan had been planning to leave me. That part was real. The secret weekend cabin, the partner, the captioned sunrise photo about new beginnings, it was all exactly what it looked like. He had been moving money for months, restructuring his stake in the firm, hiding accounts, quietly cutting me out of everything he could reach. He thought he was being careful. But his mother and his brother had found out first. They had seen the insurance policies. They had run their own numbers. $5 million if Nathan died now while Margaret was still the beneficiary, before any divorce could alter the estate, before any hidden account could surface in discovery. A divorce would have split everything with me and cost the family dearly. A death, staged as an accident, on a trip Nathan had conveniently planned and announced himself that paid $5 million and left them holding the entire estate. They had not even needed to invent the trip. Nathan had handed it to them. All they had to do was make sure the truck stopped responding exactly where the road ran out. There was one thing Margaret had not counted on. One final secret Nathan had kept even from his own family. Sophia was never supposed to be in that car. She had not been part of the plan. She had been Nathan's last private arrangement, a woman he was escaping toward, not one his mother had ever accounted for. Margaret had planned to bury her son and collect. Instead, she buried his mistress alongside him, and based on everything that followed, never once flinched. I will not pretend there was anything clean in any of it. Nathan had intended to leave me on that cliff. He would have let me find my own way back down, returned to an empty condo with changed locks and drained accounts, and simply moved forward. He was not a good man, and I had spent 6 years loving a version of him that had quietly stopped existing. But no one gets to be murdered by their own family for an insurance payment and have the world simply move on. There is a kind of cold evil that stops being about any one person and becomes a question of whether the world is going to let it stand. I decided it wasn't going to, not while I was breathing and still able to read a ledger. I gave everything to Detective Reeves, the 2 insurance policies, the full money trail, the restructured accounts, the timeline, the laptop, every thread. And then the family did what guilty people do when they believe they are still winning. They got impatient. Wyatt began calling me. First quietly, almost politely asking about Nathan's files, saying there were documents the family needed to settle the estate. Then the tone shifted. He began demanding. He had realized the laptop was gone. He did not know how much I had seen. He set a meeting at downtown parking structure, after dark, alone. Detective Reeves listened to the recording of that call and said, almost gently, "We can work with this." They wired me, and I went. I'm not going to tell you I was brave. My entire body was vibrating as I walked into that concrete stairwell and saw Wyatt waiting beneath a broken overhead light, pacing, sweating through his shirt, something rigid in his jacket pocket, catching the dim yellow glow. What I felt in that moment was not bravery. It was the thing that remains after fear burns completely away, a kind of terrible, absolute patience. I had been building to this for weeks. I could wait 3 more minutes. "You bring it?" he said. "Bring what?" "Don't." His voice cracked. "The files, the laptop, all of it. You give it to me right now or you don't walk out." I looked at him, my husband's brother, the man who had handed a mechanic cash to bleed a brake line until his own blood relative drove through a safety railing, and I asked him the only question I had come there to ask. I asked him whether his mother had known Sophia would be in the car. I asked him if they had toasted to it afterward. He lost control entirely. He came at me, and there was something in his hand catching the dead light, and then the stairwell exploded with sound. Doors slamming from 3 directions, flashlight beams cutting the dark, voices, drop it, on the ground. Wyatt stood frozen in the middle of it all, his mouth open, his entire plan collapsing on his face in real time. They took him down to the concrete. As they cuffed him, he twisted his head to find me, and his eyes held a hatred so pure it almost resembled something else entirely. He said I would pay for this. Said something about ghosts, the kind of thing men say when everything else has run out. I did not say much in return. I said something about telling it to the judge. I said the names of the 2 people who had gone through that railing. My voice did not shake. I had done all my shaking already. My phone rang while they were walking him out. It was the second detective, the one who had gone to the house. Margaret was in custody. She had confessed before they had finished reading her rights, not out of guilt, the detective said, but out of fury, trying to pin everything on Wyatt to save herself. Mother and son, blaming each other across 2 interview rooms. There is a kind of justice that does not feel good and is still exactly right. That was it. I stood in the empty stairwell as the adrenaline drained out of me all at once, the way a tide goes out and leaves the sand flat and absolutely still. Quinn caught my elbow the same way the older woman in the red windbreaker had caught it at the cliff overlook, weeks and a lifetime ago. I did not say anything. Neither did she. There was nothing left to say that the night hadn't already finished. The rest you can probably guess. But I am going to say it anyway because the people who hear stories like mine deserve to know how they end, not just how they hurt. The estate case dissolved quickly once the criminal charges landed. The law is precise on this point. A person cannot inherit from someone they murdered. Full stop. There is no provision, no loophole, no sympathetic clause. Margaret's name on that $5 million policy meant nothing the moment her name appeared in a charging document. Wyatt's folder, the rushed will, the confident voice at the guest book became evidence in a homicide file. Renee handled the rest. She is one of the best attorneys I have ever known, and she was, in those final weeks, genuinely brilliant. What had been mine came back to me. What Nathan had hidden in restructured accounts and moved stakes and quiet transfers, Renee found it, methodically and without theater, and brought it back into the light. Every number he had tried to bury, I helped her find. It was, in the end, the most precise piece of forensic accounting I have ever done. I was working on my own life, and I did not miss a single line. I sold the condo. I could not sleep there. I had not been able to sleep in it since the morning. Nathan made breakfast in an apron and kissed my forehead with cologne that smelled like something he was covering up. I sold it without ceremony and gave most of the furniture away to people who wanted it. Dana stayed with me through all of it. My sister. The one who drove 3 hours in the dark the very first night without asking a single question and sat on the edge of a motel bed while I shook and never once told me to be okay faster than I could manage. She is the reason I held together through the parts where holding together felt entirely theoretical. I took a long stretch of time away from work, longer than I thought I would need, and exactly as long as I actually did. I learned to sleep again. I learned to sit in a quiet room without running numbers. I learned that the body holds shock, the way soil holds water after a flood long after the surface looks dry. You are still saturated somewhere deep. A few months after the sentencing, I packed one suitcase. Just one. I flew somewhere warm and far, somewhere with a different language on the signs, and no one who knew my name or my story. I had not decided how long I was going. I had not booked a return. At the gate, before I boarded, I stopped and turned around. I looked back at the city behind the terminal windows, the skyline that had held my entire marriage inside it. The early years when things were good, and I had believed in them completely. The long middle stretch where I had felt the wrongness gathering and told myself I was imagining it. The cliff, the wind, the silver ocean, the phone call with the careful flat voice, all of it compressed now into something I could hold in both hands and look at clearly without flinching. I turned back around. I got on the plane. We climbed through the marine layer and broke above the clouds, and the cabin filled suddenly with light, the sharp, clean light that lives above weather, above everything that accumulates at ground level. I closed my eyes and let it sit on my face. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel healed. I felt something quieter than both of those things and more durable. Settled. That was the word, like an account finally balanced, like a ledger closed. Whoever I was going to become next, I was going to find out alive. And that, in the end, was the only number that had ever mattered.